be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So what I want to do here is be a little bit dangerous. And I'm going to shoot from the hip on this video, but I want to have a discussion on how to kill Wolverine and Deadpool permanently. Now, this discussion requires us to ignore a couple things. The most notable being the storylines, the death of Wolverine and the death of Deadpool. Now, I know it seems kind of weird that we have to do that, but the death of Wolverine basically just dealt with Logan being covered in adamantium from head to toe, and it seemed as though it basically suffocated him and he ended up dying. The death of Deadpool was a storyline that basically led up to the end of Deadpool's story. They didn't really kill him off per se. He basically just died like everybody else with the collapse of the multiverse leading up to Secret Wars. Now, as some of you guys may have noticed though, we did talk about how to kill Wolverine as part of our discussion on the Xavier Protocols, but the Xavier Protocols was a concept designed to kill mutants using the powers and abilities of other mutants. And so we're actually going to deviate away from this because even then, that's not necessarily permanent. It's not necessarily something that would last forever. However, what we're going to talk about here in this video will be a permanent solution to the lives of Wolverine and Deadpool. Now, the way that we're going to kill them is actually going to be really interesting here. In Marvel Comics, you have two types of substances that can disrupt healing factors, and each one does it in two different ways, or I guess in a different way. The first is called carbonadium. Now, carbonadium is basically Russia's version of adamantium. When adamantium was created, when it was effectively synthesized by accident in an attempt to duplicate the material of Captain America's shield, it was bonded to Wolverine's skeleton, it was bonded to Sabretooth, it was bonded to maybe one or two other people, but the result is that it is a super hard material that is nigh unbreakable. The only exception to that, depending on the circumstances that I can think of, is enchanted Uru metal, which is the material that makes up Thor's hammer. But even then, that's kind of so-so. It depends on who's writing at the time. But historically, a true adamantium, the adamantium bonded to Wolverine's bones, is indestructible. It cannot be destroyed by any known means. Of course, barring cosmic entities or something like that. But carbonadium basically slows the healing factor of those individuals who come into contact with it. Now, the most notable use of carbonadium in Marvel Comics is with the tentacles of Omega Red. He is, of course, a super popular villain among certain circles, those individuals who are huge fans of Wolverine, but he is one of Wolverine's biggest enemies, and he routinely uses his carbonadium tentacles to disrupt the healing factor of Wolverine to kind of put him on an even playing field, and then the battle just sort of commences as it would, you know, in Marvel Comics. The other part of this, or the other aspect of this, is what's called the Muramasa blade. Now, the Muramasa blade was created by a guy named Muramasa, and there's actually two different versions of them. There's what's called the Black Blade, and there's what's called the true Muramasa blade. Now, we're going to be talking about the second one, and the reason why is because the first one isn't really relevant to our discussion here. The second Muramasa blade was forged at the request of Wolverine himself, and what had happened was during Logan's time, before he joined the X-Men, before he was part of Canada's Department K, when he first met, I guess, Hulk for the first time, or first battled him for the first time, you know, when he first appeared in comics, basically, he had traveled around the world, he'd had a lot of different experiences, things like that, but he had started a family with a woman named Itsu, or Itsu, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that, but the result was that she was killed, and his child was killed. And so in response to the revenge that he sought, he went out and found a guy named Muramasa. Now, we don't know much about Muramasa himself. All we know is that he's basically like, you know, the Marvel Comics equivalent of Hattori Hanzo from Kill Bill, if any of you guys are familiar with that movie. He is a master swordsman, and he's basically like the one guy that all of the individuals, villains and heroes alike in Marvel Comics who use swords go to. Taskmaster went to Muramasa. Deadpool went to Muramasa to have his blades forged. Of course, we know Wolverine went to Muramasa to get his own sword. But instead of simply just forging a sword at the behest of its wielder, depending on the purpose, Muramasa will actually imbue the sword with the essence of the individual themselves. In the case of the Muramasa blade, it was imbued with the essence of Wolverine's spirit, his rage, his anger, his desire for revenge, and that made the sword stronger. The result of this was that the Muramasa blade was designed for the purpose of killing anybody who came into contact with it, including Wolverine himself. Now, this is kind of a misnomer, and one of the reasons why I say that is the indication that Marvel gives us is that the Muramasa blade negates healing factors. But when it says, or when Marvel says that the Muramasa blade will kill Wolverine himself, it's not really the blade directly that does it. And there's a big distinction here. The Carbonadium slows healing factors, the Muramasa blade negates healing factors. But in order to kill a person, you're still required to basically kill them through conventional means. And this is where killing, Wolverine and Deadpool permanently comes into play. With something like Carbonadium, if you were to assault Wolverine with it, his healing factor would be slowed extremely. It would take him a long time to recover, but you could still do it. In the same capacity that you could, remove a limb, assuming you could cut through, the adamantium, remove his head from his body. The only way that could ever really be done is, again, by using something like Carbonadium to slow it down. But if you have a Muramasa blade, that healing factor goes away. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no actual time frame. I think it's just contextual based on the story. And so one writer may say that it takes a day for Wolverine's healing factor to come back after being attacked with the Muramasa blade. Another writer may say that it takes 3 months. Another writer may say it takes a year, or it may take years. We have no idea. It really just depends on what the writer wants to do at the time, because the Muramasa blade is not something that you see very often in Marvel Comics. But the fact remains that by killing Wolverine in this fashion, you'll basically remove his healing factor in its entirety. The catch to this, or the caveat, is because the Muramasa blade contains an essence of Wolverine's soul itself, it's entirely possible to absorb the entirety of Wolverine's soul into the Muramasa blade and destroy his body in its entirety. Basically turn his body into a shell, more or less. And he would just reside inside the blade, and he wouldn't be able to reconstitute himself. He would actually have to put his soul back in his body, and then he would start to heal again. But again, this is all just kind of contextual. We're just kind of, we're left to our own devices on this in a lot of ways. But with Deadpool, it's a little trickier. In Marvel Comics, Deadpool's immortality is attributed to a curse. He was cursed by Thanos with immortality out of jealousy for the fact that Mistress Death showed affection towards Deadpool and didn't show affection towards Thanos. But the issue with this, or one of the big misconceptions about this, is that Deadpool is genuinely immortal. In Marvel Comics, there's a huge difference between being genuinely immortal and being immortal by virtue of something else. Genuine immortals are people like Gideon, who is what's called an external, basically an inner group of mutants who are legitimately immortal and cannot be killed by any known means except for when he died. And I know it seems kind of weird, but there are different kinds of externals. There's a character named Selene. She's believed to be an external. Not really sure about that, but she is the oldest mutant alive. But she has to absorb the energy of others in order to keep herself alive. And she absorbed the life energies of Gideon, effectively absorbed his soul, which seemed to kill him in the process. And so again, with the example of Wolverine, it turned Gideon's body into a shell. There was really nothing there. Aside from something like that, Gideon will always come back. He will always find a way to reconstitute himself. Now, this doesn't take into account chopping his head off and removing it. We'd have to assume that, like Wolverine, the head would have to be reconnected to the body, or it may be that he would grow a new head. As far as I know, there's never been an instance where Marvel's explored that storyline in their comics, so really we're just kind of left to our own guesses here. But the fact remains that with Deadpool, he's not genuinely immortal. His healing factor has basically been boosted to the most extreme form that he will heal from anything. So in, Funeral for a Freak, which is where the curse was verified by Thanos, he healed himself from a single hand. But this requires that he heal. It requires that his healing factor be intact. And so again, using something like the Muramasa blade, you could negate his healing factor, and then you could incinerate the entirety of his body, or something like that. You could negate his healing factor, and then you could, well, I guess that'd really be the only way. Now, something else that we kind of need to touch on here, something else that I want to have a discussion on, is in the story Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool himself actually talked about how to negate his own healing factor. And what he said was when that alternate reality version of himself went around and was attacking the X-Men, various people like that, he had kidnapped Dakin, the son of Wolverine, and X-23, I think it was. And he had basically forced their bodies to endure electroshock over and over and over again in order to keep their healing powers at bay. Now, this story, I believe, came before the Muramasa blade, and so that was never really a concept in existence that they could explore. But in Marvel Comics, there is also something called burning out a healing factor. Wolverine's healing factor can burn out. He can heal his body so many times, or he can heal his body from such an extreme event that, like a muscle, it'll tire out. Think of it like a human heart. If you run too hard, or if you lift too many weights, I don't know, your heart will give out and it'll basically stop. We call that a heart attack. With healing factors, it's the exact same way. So I guess a healing factor attack, the result is that the healing factor will simply just stop working. Now, this is usually temporary. With the characters like Wolverine and Deadpool, this is temporary. Marvel usually throws this into the story as a way to experiment to see if fans would read stories where they didn't have healing factors. But the fact remains that a healing factor can burn out. It can stop working after a time. But again, at this point, we're just talking about how to kill them permanently. The only feasible way that I know of in Marvel Comics to effectively kill Wolverine and Deadpool permanently is to attack them with the Muramasa blade, negate their healing factors, and then incinerate their bodies in their entirety. The only issue with this, again, comes with Wolverine, but you know, again, this is really just kind of hypothetical stuff that we're talking about here. So anyway, if you guys can think of any cool ways to kill Wolverine, I'm kind of curious. Post a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. And yeah, we'll catch you all later. Peace.